Hey everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto used car sales. Today we have a 2017 Ford Explorer, low miles, 106,000 miles, only $17,995. Runs absolutely perfectly, except for sometimes it randomly misfires, very intermittently. Would you buy this car? Well, we're going to see if we can figure out why it's doing this intermittent misfire. Alright, so what's the history with this Ford Explorer? It's from a local used car lot, actually about half hour away, and usually I go over there to diagnose their vehicles, but this one, they said, might take me a while because the problem is extremely intermittent. So they said usually it happens when you're accelerating under a load, like getting onto a highway or something, medium throttle, engine's kind of under load, it'll just start shaking, check engine light will start flashing, then you keep driving and everything goes back to normal. Sounds like a classic misfire, maybe worn spark plugs, under load, it'll miss a few times, disable the injector, and then go back to normal. Well, they do the easy stuff themselves. So they got all OEM ignition coils and spark plugs, all 6. Test drove it again, they thought it was fixed. Nope, happened again. Doesn't happen every hill or every acceleration, just once in a while. They said the codes were misfire codes. They didn't give me the exact numbers, but they said it was on bank 1, or the rear bank cylinders 1, 2, and 3. Interesting. Then they're like, hey, we've seen these things melt and restrict catalytic converters, and the cat wasn't terribly expensive, it was $500, so they replaced the, I think, bank 1 converter. Again, OEM, they got it from the dealer, put it on, thought it was fixed. The guy was driving it, happened again. He's like, that's it, we're calling Ivan and letting him deal with this thing. And I asked him, can you reliably reproduce this misfire? And they said no, they can't. The car lot owner who brought it over last night said it happened to him once during the day, but on the entire trip here, half hour, 40-minute trip, he said it ran perfectly. So I think this is going to be an uphill battle here. So I'm in OBD2 mode. I did a full code scan in the Ford menu. Absolutely 0 codes stored, no pending codes, no anything. So in OBD2 we see we have 2 readiness monitors not complete. And if we go to readiness, after DTC is cleared, we have fuel system monitor not ready, and what else here? EVAP not ready. Okay, fine. Let's read fault code. No fault code. We're going to take this thing on a test drive, so let's look at some basic data. Again, OBD2 mode. This is familiar data. So coolant temp, engine RPM. This has air fuel ratio sensors upstream. We'll look at our long-term trims, our oxygen sensors downstream. Bank 1 sensor 2, bank 2 sensor 1. We can look at the current for bank 1 sensor 1 and bank 2 sensor 1, and then short-term trims. So that's 13 data PIDs. I guess we don't need coolant temp here. So let's graph these. Everything looks spot on, right? I see long-term trims on bank 1. It's a little bit, it's about 7% less than bank 2. That's -7, that's -14. I don't really like that. It should be closer to 0. Let's see if I raise the RPMs up a little bit. -5, -2, okay. If I put it under load, it back in park. Everything's smooth. So let's take it for a spin, just monitor some data. Alright, so we made it to the paved road. So far, no issues. I did notice a little bit of a surge. I was just very light throttle. You see the RPMs are... like, what is that? Bruh, 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 bruh. See the little needle going back and forth? You can feel in the engine too. It's kind of like blah, 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 blah. Okay. Let's give it some acceleration. These things have terrible outward visibility. Huge pillars. It's really wide. Headrest in the back. Can't see out the rear window. But let's see how it goes. Okay, not bad. I'm going to go into a higher gear and put it under a little bit of load going up this grade. It's got a bad wheel bearing. Seems to be okay. Alright, next day back to the Ford Exploder. So I reached out to the shop owner and asked him, this thing is not willing to act up for me as I suspected. What were the exact codes that you scanned it last time you set the check engine light? He sent me a list of codes and it was just P0300, 301, 302, and 303. So indeed, the rear bank, all three cylinders were detecting misfires. So, what could cause a whole bank to drop out for like, 30 seconds or whatever until it gets back to normal? The only thing I can think of is some cam timing, variable cam timing glitch, maybe a sticky oil solenoid, maybe the exhaust cam stayed retarded or something. That bank is shaking, it cuts the injectors for literally, at that point, and then it re-enables them as soon as the fault disappears. Now, why wouldn't it set a timing code? I don't know. Cars can be weird, but we're going to do a cold start, take this thing around the block. The only clue I have right now is that kind of fluctuating idle, 600 to 700 RPM. Sometimes it's very noticeable. We're just going to plot the degrees on all the camshafts and see if one of them is lazy or has some hysteresis. So here we go. Alright, so after cruising for a while, I'm noticing something very interesting. Intake A camshaft, actual minus desired, is up and down quite a bit, while bank 2 is right on the money. So we could have a lazy solenoid on the intake camshaft on bank 1. For sure. Let me pull over and see if the fuel readiness monitor passed. I'm really thinking we're going to be chasing a sticky VVT solenoid here. See how much more activity there is on the orange trace versus the red trace. So bank 1, this is bank 2, desired minus actual. There's a lot more up and down, like it's trying to catch up and overshooting. Classic sticky solenoid. So I'm going to rev it up. trying to reproduce that stumbling idle, but it's being reluctant. Let's cruise for a little bit more. I want to catch this, so this orange trace versus the red trace, that's going to be the key thing to look at. Okay, so I saved this screenshot while I was driving. So intake and bank 1 and bank 2, the purple and the yellow, that's the actual positions. So let's say bank 2 is no good because it's not setting any misfire codes on that. The purple looks like it has, like the cam is moving slower. You see, this has more pronounced changes over a short period of time. This one's kind of a little lazy, and it looks like it's a little delayed. It's hard to tell in these little graphs, I agree, but the same scale's there. If you look at the orange and the red, the scales are different, which is unfortunate. So this one looks worse because it scales from -30 to 30. This one's from -60 to 60. So let me minimize the number of data PIDs. I just want to look at the intakes now because the exhausts look right on the money. Like these two, identical. Right? So we don't care about exhaust. We'll just graph RPM, TPS, and the intakes. Well, in this test drive, the two intake camshaft positions look identical, and the air is also very close, bank to bank, same scale, looks identical. So maybe the more I drive it, the better it runs. Now, what's the history of the vehicle? It might have been like a repo where the previous driver didn't change their oil at all, and now that the shop has it back, they changed the oil, they're doing all this tune-up stuff, and it's driving better and better. The oil control solenoids could have gotten sticky, gummed up. That's kind of what it sounds like to me. So I'm going to give the owners a call. It's not doing the surging at all, idle anymore, at all, like it was doing yesterday. Like it's dead smooth. Everything's perfect. Let me shut it off. Very smooth. I haven't felt the little surgy idle today yet at all. And the driving conditions were exactly the same. So I'm going to call a shop owner and tell him, I think it's fixed. What's the history? Was it black and sludgy? You know, was the oil really bad when you guys got it back? And, you know, the oil is full and fresh right now. Obviously, they did the oil change there, but that's all I can think of, so maybe no parts required. The two camshafts are just behaving identically now, the two intakes. And before, bank one was a little slow. I don't know what to say. Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. We're back on the 2017 Ford Explorer. This is the one we took a look at a month ago, where apparently the rear bank of cylinders was just shutting off for a few seconds, and then it would come back. I couldn't reproduce the problem. It would happen very intermittently, like maybe once a day, going up a certain grade according to the customer. But anyways, this vehicle originally came from the auction. Then, you know, they did a full tune-up on it, coils, plugs. They even replaced the bank 1 intake cam solenoid that looked a little lazy on the scanner. That was my best guess last time. it was still doing it, and they actually sold the car. It's a small dealer here with a warranty. So the customer drove it, put about almost 1,000 miles on it with this intermittent, bank 1 misfire problem, and then the vehicle just completely shut down. It was towed back. So now we're here to see why it doesn't even start anymore. So whatever was happening with bank 1, perhaps it broke all the way. I have no idea. They said there's one code stored this time, P0394 for a bank 1 camshaft sensor. So they tried replacing both cam sensors on bank 1. Obviously that didn't do anything. They put the original ones back. So this is the way the car sits. Quick code scan doesn't show anything interesting at all. In the PCM, starter motor deactivated, engine crank time too long. Yep, so it's a crank no start right now. The mechanic here said he took a look at the front spark plugs. They were really dirty, black, fouled, smelled like gas. He replaced those and did a compression check on the front 3 cylinders on bank 1. They were all about 200 psi. So you don't know where this is going to go. My gut feeling tells me it's going to be a timing issue, where if it's spraying gas but it's not igniting it, spark's not occurring at the right time maybe. So what would your initial go or no go test be right off the bat? Think about that. What I want to do first, I want to do least intrusive, easiest things first. I want to do a relative compression test with an amp clamp around the main fat starter cable here, and we'll sync it with one of the ignition coils. Again, easy to get to, easy to reach, so just 2 channels. Let's set up the scope and do that real quick, see what happens. I mean, we can crank it over, just see what it sounds like. That's the easiest thing to do. Let's see what it sounds like. Let's see, foot in the brake. Sounds not too bad, pretty even. But that sound for the start, I was like, that was not good. So yeah, let's do that relative compression test. Okay, so 2 channels. Channel 1, amp clamp, 1 volt is going to be 100 amps. Channel 2 is a sync on coil number, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Coil number 4, easy to get to, with a 10-to-1 attenuator just to protect my scope. So let's set these up. So on channel 1, that'll be good, just a 2-volt scale. And then B is going to be a 10x probe. And then we want to bump that up to our 50 volts. So let's re-zero our amp clamp. Yep, we saw a little glitch there. And then let's just crank it over. Alright, here we go. So I'm going to let it crank. Okay, very good. So you see, it took a while for the spark to even start occurring. Look how long it took to sync that. And is the spark occurring anywhere near TDC, and what cylinder? So it looks like all the compression humps are pretty even, and then I go 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Shouldn't it occur every 6th hump if everything was synced together? Okay, very, very curious. But the humps do look even, and the compression sounds decent. For some reason, the computer is not commanding the spark right away. It took, a couple engine revolutions here for it to get the sync. Let's just scan the PCM one more time for codes. Check it out. No DTCs. Very interesting. Alright, next step is to add a channel pressure transducer on cylinder number 4. I took the spark plug out and it is absolutely wet with gas. So mechanic here is definitely is on the right track. So what gives? Is the spark not occurring at the right time? We'll find out real soon with the pressure transducer. Okay, pressure transducer's in. This only takes a minute, but the information you get is invaluable. So the coil is out, and I put the spark plug back in it and just grounded it on the block there. So we still want the spark to occur. And then here's the pressure hose, pressure transducer, that's on. That's going to be on channel 3. So let's go set that up and crank this thing over again. So we're going to make channel C our PHAD 265, and the scale, let's bump it up to -25 to 225. I bumped up the red channel, the ignition coil, to 100 volts, so it wouldn't take up as much space on the screen. There it is, we're at 0 psi. Crank it over. Oh, it tried. It tried to start. Okay, so let's see. Do we have a timing problem? Again, my gut feeling says timing problem. So first, the spark is 180 degrees off. It's here, right there, and finally is like, hey, let's try syncing with the correct cylinder. So it occurs quite a bit before TDC. Right there, quite a bit before TDC. I expect it to be closer to TDC. Then it's acting like a waste spark system here. It's all over the place. Like here, it's off. It did not occur on the compression spike. Here it did. It was quite a bit advanced. And what do we see? What is this? I don't like this. It's like a cam is retarded or advanced, or something's wrong with the timing. Let's put in some cursors. First, let me save this waveform. And by the way, when we use the scope in the videos, I always try to post the waveforms on the Google Drive, and there's a link in the description. So download the PICO software. That's free. And you can open up those files and follow along. A lot of stuff you can do without even having a scope. You can learn how to use a scope without having one. Pretty neat stuff. So check that out. Let me save this, and we'll analyze the waveform. Okay, so it's looking more and more like a timing, mechanical timing problem here. So cursor is set up here, 0 to 720. Now this spark, where does that occur? So put the white square cursor on there, and we're at almost minus 15 degrees. 15 degrees before top dead center. On startup, I'd expect to see closer to TDC, closer to 0. So, and that's occurring on this particular compression stroke, but otherwise sometimes it occurs closer to the exhaust stroke. Right there, it wasn't even close to the compression stroke. So this engine, the timing is very confused. Then this is a red flag right here. So I would expect on a normal, cranking waveform to be a nice smooth tower, to come back down smoothly to bottom dead center, and then on the exhaust stroke you would see atmosphere. What do we see at the end of the exhaust stroke right here? Not good. The pressure is actually rising to about 10 psi at the end of the exhaust stroke, and then the intake opens. We get our intake pull, and then start our compression stroke. So timing is 100% off. The timing chain jumped or something happened. I'm actually surprised that the engine is cranking as well as it is. Or it sounds, the compression sounds healthy. So, peak compression right here, 160. On a modern engine, I'd probably expect higher than that. And you know, if the exhaust cam is out of time, it actually won't affect peak compression that much at all. It'll just let it out earlier. So that's pretty crazy. So I saved this waveform. You can go check it out. Now I want to move to bank 1, see if it's exactly the same. It might be, because the relative compression humps are all very even. So it's like we have similar compression on all the cylinders. But we can go to cylinder, I don't know if it's easy to get to, it might be under the intake, like cylinder number 1. And you know, just measure that. But otherwise, you know, you could try to do cam and crank correlation, measure all those with a scope, but if you don't have a known good, it's not as definitive as these in-cylinder pressure transducer tests. Well, the rear cylinders are much more painful to get to than I would like. Do we need to go that far? So what was the original code that was set? 394. This sounds so familiar. If you guys remember that Jeep Wrangler, that was setting a 394. It's a camshaft circuit code, intermittent, not a circuit code. It just loses its sync and then sets that code. So, and that's for the exhaust cam on bank 1, which we're suspecting to be over advanced. Isn't that crazy? So I want to unplug the cam sensor on this exhaust cam, see if the thing fires up. Alright, so I unplugged bank 2 exhaust cam sensor. Let's roll the scope one more time, see what happens. Will this thing fire up? I don't know, I'll give it a 50-50 shot as long as bank 1 is still in sync. We don't know if bank 1 is in sync because we can't get a pressure transducer in there easily. Let's see. Okay, again, crank no start. Let's see if we set any codes. Still no codes. That's crazy. With the cam sensor unplugged. Nope, no codes. How about that? Alright, one more thing to try is unplug the bank 2 intake cam sensor. That's a 3-wire. So the exhaust one is a 2-wire. Oh, we have the scope here. It's easy to do that experiment. Nope. Pretty crazy. Sparks occurring everywhere. Exhaust and intake stroke. Exhaust cam is so advanced. I wonder if we could pop that front valve cover off and just do a visual inspection on it. See the timing marks. I do want to get a transducer in one of the rear cylinders as well. Alright, next capture, we're repeating the same experiment with cylinder number 1. I did have to lift up the intake manifold a little bit, popped off the ignition coil, and attached channel, the sink to the coil, and then pressure transducer in cylinder number 1. So let's crank it over, see what bank 1 looks like, if it's identical to bank 2, or maybe it's not, who knows. Alright, here we go, and fire in the hole. I think it's going to be exactly the same. Identical. Cylinder 1 is identical to cylinder 4. Same little hump. same everything. So is the whole engine out of time, meaning that the primary chain jumped, because what are the chances that both secondary chains jump just like on one cam? Customer needs a definitive answer. Do they have to take off this timing cover? Again, yes, but can we be very accurate and say bank 1 or bank 2, you know, exhaust or intake cam, or what exactly jumped? Maybe it was the primary chain on the crank and now everything's off. Maybe the intake and the exhaust are all over advanced. That's a possibility. What's the definitive answer? Well, this little hump right here, we can use that to our advantage. So usually the exhaust valve closes and the intake valve opens right at, you know, there's a little overlap at TDC exhaust stroke. Look where this transition is happening. So I put the cursor here, at least 30 degrees advanced. Everything's 30 degrees advanced. The intake is also 30 degrees advanced. Is the whole engine 30 degrees advanced? I mean, instead of here, we should be somewhere around here on the exhaust opening. I would think there would be a more smooth transition than the exhaust stroke. This is not, you know, the spark might be coming from the crank signal. I mean, shouldn't it fire up when it's like 15 degrees before top dead center? You would think you would have, it'd be close enough, but that is really advanced. So there's no way around it. This timing chain has to come off, and you know, am I sure enough that that's the problem before? Like, what if they take the timing chain off and there's no issues there? Who's going to pay for that? That's where the guarantee comes in. So if I think of anything else, we'll do more checks, but at this point we have to verify mechanical timing on this 3.5 V6. Okay, so here's the timing chain setup on this 3.5, and there's one huge chain that drives the intake sprockets on both banks, and then from there there are little chains that drive the exhausts. So one master chain for the whole shebang, and it also drives the water pump, the infamous water pump. Yeah, I mean, so if it jumped on the crank, then both banks could be advanced by the same amount, for sure. That's the only way this can happen. If the banks stay in sync, so the number of teeth between the banks didn't change, but the crank just, however it happened, pretty nuts. Can we see how many degrees? Well, if we find a picture of the crank sprocket, but there are the marks, 1, 2, and 3. Colored links, the VCT units. Let's look up a picture of this crank sprocket. And here's a picture of the crank sprocket. It's 29 teeth, and 360 divided by 29 is about 13 degrees. So if you look at our waveform, you know, are we one tooth off? Are we more than one tooth off? It's hard to say. You'd think if it was one tooth off, it would still start up and run, but I guess that's not the case. Well, if one tooth is about 13 degrees from here to here, where I think this transition should be, is 39 degrees. So at least 3 teeth off. That's my best guess here. But that would definitely cause it not to run. I'm surprised the spark is occurring as close to TDC as it is. I'll have to refresh that picture, but you know, maybe the spark is commanded by the crank sensor instead of the cam. Yeah, it's 13 degrees, but